Okay, we've got quite a mix today. Three really interesting articles giving us different perspectives. We're looking at India's global strategy, then shifting to its parliamentary processes, and finally getting a feel for things on the ground in Moscow.
Yeah, three distinct snapshots. We have analysis from, a former diplomat, a policy expert, and then some real on-the-ground reporting. The idea is to pull out the key takeaways for you, to make sense of these, well, pretty complex dynamics.
Let's jump straight into the first one. It's titled A Profound Shift, India at a Strategic Crossroad. The author argues India's at a major turning point, even comparing it to Vasco da Gama's arrival. That sounds
It
dramatic.
is a strong analogy,
Sure.
definitely. The point being made is about the scale of change. Just like new sea routes back then totally reshaped trade and power, the argument is that today's reshuffling of global value chains is just as transformative for India.
And the cautionary part, the complacent Xamarin.
Right. It's a warning, essentially. Don't miss the strategic importance of what's happening, like the Xamarin supposedly did back then. You need to recognize these big shifts and, well, act decisively.
A big part of this shift, the article says, is the old donor-recipient model just doesn't fit anymore. China's economic power changed things.
Absolutely. China's rise has fundamentally altered that old hierarchy. The piece points out China is now a huge donor itself, plus it's overtaken the U.S. in manufacturing,
Yeah.
in global trade. It changes everything about how international influence and aid work.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And tied into that, there's this sense that big international organizations like the WTO, the UN, they're losing some of their punch, at least for certain major players.
yeah, there's a definite trend towards fragmentation. The piece suggests less faith in these multilateral bodies. It mentions things like the U.S. pulling out of agreements or how the G7 nations prioritize their own vaccine supplies during the pandemic. It hints at a shift back towards maybe more power-based dealings.
Which leads to more bilateral deals, right? But the article warns these can be risky, especially if you're not the dominant partner.
That's the concern. These one-on-one agreements might force countries into prioritizing the bigger partner's interests. Things like tariffs being defined by trade imbalances, potentially pressuring countries on their internal laws, and the special treatment for least developed countries is fading too. It's becoming a more competitive landscape.
So out of all this disruption, the author talks about a post-WTO frame emerging. What does that look like?
Well, it seems to be characterized by a concentration of economic power. The U.S., China, the EU, India responsible for a huge chunk of recent global growth, but also a power shift. The U.S. may be relatively less dominant, Russia building stronger energy links in Asia, especially with China and India. Asia's resurgence is a key theme.
So given all this shifting ground, what's the main takeaway for India?
The core message is strategic agility. India needs to be smart, proactive. The author draws a parallel to how China really leveraged its WTO entry. Now, with the WTO perhaps less central, there's a new kind of opportunity. It means carefully managing trade, especially with the U.S. pushing its interests, but also building on the improved ties with China. Prime Minister Modi's Asian century idea fits right in here.
Interesting. And the piece even sees an opportunity for India in ASEAN's current troubles.
Yeah, the idea is that with ASEAN facing some internal issues, India could maybe push harder for an Asian common market, perhaps using bilateral deals as stepping stones. As that WTO non-discrimination principle weakens, the suggestion is for India to propose new cooperative structures, looking towards ASEAN and also the African Union, huge future consumer markets there.
This involves new rules too, right, for global value chains.
Exactly. Focusing on reducing those non-tariff barriers, treating goods, services, investment, infrastructure, all as one package, maybe with annual reviews of the impact on each country.
It contrasts this needed approach with India's past foreign policy.
Right, the article characterizes past policy as more focused on balancing powers, prioritizing peace, maybe over-aggressive economic development, like Bandung, the non-aligned movement, more focus on UN resolutions than, say, trade opportunities or tech innovation.
And the path forward involves talent and tech.
Definitely. A national consensus on nurturing talent, skills, employment to regain a technological edge. It points out that development paths were different, West versus East. India's potential in open-source software is highlighted. Look at Huawei making advanced chips despite sanctions, or Chinese open-source AI. India's strength was software. Maybe you can leverage that again.
So learn from China's reemergence.
In a way. The lesson being national consensus on your own path to prosperity, not just copying Western models. Patents are mentioned as a key indicator, and affordable energy, too. India's digital infrastructure, its human talent, its data. These are assets to build world-class AI, become a cyber power. a bit like its historical textile dominance was based on skill.
Okay, a lot to think about there on India's strategic choices. Let's shift gears to the second piece. Enhancing parliamentary oversight in India. This takes us inside India's governance system. What's the main thrust here?
The central issue is about how well Parliament is actually overseeing the executive, holding the government accountable. It starts with a nod to the Constituent Assembly debates, specifically Dr. Ambedkar arguing for the parliamentary system, because it allows for that daily and periodic accountability, even if it meant, perhaps, less stability than a presidential system.
But the argument now is that this oversight function has weakened.
That's the core concern, yes. While the mechanisms exist, the article suggests that parliamentary scrutiny isn't as strong as it could or should be. The author makes the point that efficiency, maximum governance, shouldn't trump transparency and accountability, which require an empowered parliament.
What are the main tools Parliament uses for this?
You've got question hour, 0 hour for urgent issues, and then the department-related standing committees, the DRCs, which do the deeper dives. But the article finds issues with how they're working in practice.
Like question hour seems pretty basic.
Right. But it's often disrupted. The article cites figures during the 17th Lok Sabha. It apparently only functioned for about 60% of its time in the Lok Sabha, even less in the Rajya Sabha. That's a lot of lost opportunity for direct questioning. And even when it happens, MPs might focus on sort of isolated issues rather than digging into complex policy.
And the committees. They do detailed work, but what's the problem there?
A major limitation is that their reports, even if they're really thorough, often just don't get debated in Parliament itself, so their actual influence can be limited. There are also questions raised about, well, who gets consulted? Is it diverse enough? And because committee memberships can change, it's hard to build up that deep, long-term expertise.
But it's not all negative. The article does give examples where committees have made a difference.
Oh, absolutely. It highlights successes. For instance, the Railways Committee recommended waiving dividend payments, and that actually happened in 2016. The Transport Committee influenced changes to the Motor Vehicles Bill, important stuff like removing insurance caps, setting up a road safety board.
Any others?
Yeah, the Committee on Public Undertakings tackled delays in highway projects, recommending better land acquisition processes. The Estimates Committee pushed for more domestic uranium production. And the Public Accounts Committee, the PSC, famously exposed issues around the Commonwealth Games. The PSC apparently makes around 180 recommendations a year, and the government accepts about 80%, so they do have impact.
A key suggestion in the piece is for post-legislative scrutiny. What's that about?
It's basically looking back at laws after they've been passed and implemented for a while to see if they're actually working as intended or having unintended consequences. India, the article argues, doesn't really have a formal system for this.
So what's the proposal?
To create specific subcommittees, or maybe a dedicated body, perhaps borrowing from the UK model where government departments review major laws and then Parliament scrutinizes those reviews. It's about closing the loop, ensuring laws are effective on the ground.
And strengthening the existing committees, too.
Yes, making their findings more accessible translations, visual aids maybe, getting some key reports debated on the floor with ministers having to respond, and critically giving committees better research and technical support. MPs deal with a huge volume of complex stuff, often without specialized staff.
Technology could help there.
That's another suggestion. Using AI, data analytics to help MPs spot irregularities, track trends, ask more targeted questions. It's about equipping them better for the oversight role.
And the piece ends with a quote.
Yeah, from former President K.R. Narayan, basically saying the committee system is meant to strengthen administration through Parliament support. The underlying message is clear. Stronger oversight means a more accountable government, which ultimately honors the trust people put in their representatives.
Okay, now for our final piece. This one takes us to Moscow's Red Square, giving a sense of the mood there. What's the picture it paints?
It paints a scene leading up to Victory Day, May 9th, which is a huge deal in Russia. But the backdrop is deep mistrust of the U.S., even with some talk from figures like Trump. The general feeling reported among people there is that the war in Ukraine is really about fighting NATO expansion, and that the eastern Russian-speaking parts of Ukraine sort of rightfully belong to Russia.
The description of the square itself sounds intense.
Very nationalistic, yeah. Lots of posters, a market full of pro-Putin supporters singing, waving flags, handing out pamphlets. And these pamphlets apparently frame the war very explicitly as being against the U.S., needing a strong response, even mentioning nuclear readiness. Quite a charged atmosphere.
Did the reporter get a sense of how much support there is for the war effort?
Well, they quote an Indian student who felt safe and thought the war was going Russia's way. So that suggests some level of acceptance or support for the official line, at least among those the reporter spoke to. The piece briefly touches on the lead-up Putin's demands about NATO, the start of the special military operation, the annexations providing that context.
What about the impact of Western sanctions? Are people feeling it?
Yes, definitely mentioned. Restrictions on travel, communication, things
Yeah.
like international credit cards not working, certain apps blocked, but also a sense of adaptation, people finding ways around it, like traveling via third countries.
But life goes on.
Seems so. Weekend festivities happening alongside solemn ceremonies like honoring the war dead at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. There's a detail about GPS being down near the Kremlin because military alert, apparently due to a Ukrainian drone threat. So, tension underneath the surface.
And the overall mood remains quite defiant.
That comes across strongly, especially in quoting those news pamphlets, again blaming the U.S. for the war, claiming Russia's strategic missiles haven't been targeted for decades, implying a sort of restraint that could change.
How are they viewing potential outreach, like from Trump?
Cautiously. Foreign Minister Lavrov is quoted essentially saying they understand mutually beneficial deals, but are wary of potential traps. There's skepticism.
There's a Turkish analyst quoted too.
Yes, his view was that the war has actually united Muscovites more, despite the challenges, casualties, a falling birth rate, support possibly fluctuating. He expected Russia to gain more territory in Ukraine.
The report mentions the Kievskaya metro station. What's the significance there?
Just the name itself and the artwork depicting Ukrainian life within the old Soviet Union, it highlights that really intertwined history and perhaps how the narrative conflates the WWII liberation struggle with the current offensive.
There's also a personal story.
Yeah, a Russian woman of Ukrainian origin talking about her family trying to avoid conflict with relatives still in Ukraine. She felt positive about her life in Russia, but her grandparents were determined to stay in Ukraine. It just shows the complex mixed family ties across the border.
And religion plays a role in the narrative too.
The report describes a scene at Moscow's main mosque where the imam, who is of Turkish origin, was praying for the soldiers. It notes many soldiers come from Russia's Muslim-majority regions, reinforcing Putin's narrative of this being a unified, multi-ethnic national effort.
Is there a sense that Russia is shifting its focus internationally?
Definitely. More engagement with Asia, the Arab world, Africa. It's symbolized by Russia's double-headed eagle emblem, looking both east and west. The director of the Institute of Oriental Studies comments on this shift, though there are practical challenges mentioned, like long airport immigration lines, suggesting maybe the infrastructure isn't quite keeping pace.
And there was a conference discussing how Russia might respond to Trump.
Yes, attended by people from various countries. The backdrop mentioned is Trump apparently confronting Zelensky about a minerals deal, which adds another layer.
Any other key perspectives from that conference?
A geopolitical thinker, Margarita Mudrak, argued the conflict is about long-term security, not just one leader. She was skeptical of Trump, calling him a businessman focused on minerals, not strategic thinking, and asserted Russia wouldn't give back any territory gained since 2014, like Crimea and eastern Ukraine.
Did anyone question India's position?
Interestingly, yes. A Russian military strategist apparently asked why India was being cautious, contrasting it with other countries being more receptive. This strategist was apparently involved in some back-channel talks with the Trump administration. It also notes PM Modi didn't attend the Victory Day celebrations that year.
The report ends with reflections on history.
It does. A visit to the Museum of the Great Patriotic War of 1812 reinforces the narrative of Russia always defending against invaders. Napoleon, Hitler casting the current conflict as another defensive war, his time against NATO. A history teacher comments on this consistent historical lens, giving Russia resilience.
And a final thought from a student.
An 11th grader reflecting on remembering past sacrifices. There's a final image of AI delivery robots juxtaposed with an analyst saying Russia is ultimately about human will, not just tech, and predicting tougher times ahead for Ukraine.
So pulling these three threads together, the global strategic shifts India's navigating, the internal mechanics of accountability through parliament, and the deeply rooted perspectives driving conflict as seen from Moscow, it paints a complex picture.
Absolutely. You see the interplay between grand strategy, domestic governance, and the powerful force of national narratives and historical memories shaping current events.
It really underscores how interconnected these different levels are. Okay, lots for you to chew on there. Thinking about all these angles, the economic realignments, the oversight mechanisms, those entrenched narratives, what single factor do you think might have the biggest impact, shape the next decade the most significantly? Something to ponder.